Hello, Mitsu here. I came back after a year. I was too busy academically, so I didn't really have time to make a video yet. Since it is summer vacation, I'm hoping to make some more videos, hopefully. I also bought a new I also bought a new microphone and some lightnings for future videos. Let me talk a little about my background before we move on to the main topic. After I had my first year and the second year first term at my university, I didn't have enough tuition fees to continue my studies, as we all encounter some unexpected happenings in our family during our life. So I came back to Korea and worked as a cocktail bartender. The reason I started vaping was my colleagues had a smoking rest time, but while they were having a rest every hour, I had to wash glasses, etc., so I was jealous. Since I did not smoke cigarettes, one day I went to a vaping store to buy my first device. It was a Manufit from Just Folk. I thought the pods were too expensive for me to afford, since pods were not very well made at the time, as I had to change a lot. So I was curious about what's inside the pods. So I disassembled and opened up, and there was a wire and a cotton. I thought, well, I may be able to make this one on my own. And I had some random wire spools and cosmetic cotton pads. The outcome wasn't great at all, but it was really fun. Then I went to the vape shop once again to see what they had. Then I bought my first atomizer, Cosmonaut from District 5. Still have it in here. That was the time when people used to do clouds, bro, and tricks like O-rings and jellyfish, etc. And the liquid that I bought at the time still lasts me as my all-day vape, since I nearly had more than 100 bottles of them, as that liquid was my reference for my builds. As I was working as a cocktail bartender, I really wanted to create my own recipes and explore many different possibilities, but I could not because I was just employed. But rebuilding an atomizer did fulfill my satisfaction for the exploration I wanted to have. So vaping became a habit for me naturally since then. My personal experience as a cocktail bartender and a little experience in wine tasting actually was very useful when it came to vaping. Since from my work experience already, I could appreciate the subjective experience in nature. Therefore, in my vaping journey, I was never hyped at all, because even if others enjoy theirs and say, oh, this is the latest greatest thing, their experiences may not translate to me as well. Instead, I had a well-understood vocabulary from my experience. Therefore, I started to see a lot of tendencies involved in vaping. Yes, that's what I'm going to talk about today. The most important question in vaping: flavor. Once in a while, I hear the expressions, better flavor, too much flavor. I understood what it meant by a delicate or detailed flavor. So to understand that expression, I tried their atomizer and the build. 9 out of 10. It happened to be a case where the single flavor was dominant, crushing all the other flavor notes. 1 out of 10 was like spitback of not enough vaporizing. In places like wine, coffee, and perfume, depending on how many flavors and scents you can feel, hidden in the top, middle, and base notes, it is said to be good or expressive. But it is not simply called more flavor because it has a strong aroma, a high level of roasting, and alcohol. The flavor is strong means just a certain note that is strongly highlighted, and sweeter means just sweeter. When it comes to vape, the taste and aroma of steam are more sensitive to nose than mouth. As you may all know, our tongue can perceive 5 different tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, savory. Please grab your vaping device and vape with your nose blocked. You can immediately see the change. If there's not much change, do you vape a sweetie fruity liquid? So yes, as I'm a dessert user, the flavor profile that I experience mostly comes from the smell. If you look at these flavorings, these are flavorings that I can perceive mostly from my nose. But the sweetener, if I open it, I can't smell anything. If I have it, it is extremely sweet. This leads to the first tendency I'm going to talk about. Firstly, the reduced chamber atomizer. In my NarDA review, I mentioned that Hadaly from Psyclone modes gives a very pure taste of the liquid. What does it even mean? What I meant was, let's say I make a liquid. Let me show you the screen. And if I know each liquid recipe and each flavoring it contains, I could experience all the flavorings evenly. It even brings out flavors that I didn't want to experience. Bear in mind that this may also be subjective perception because my first single atomizer was Hadaly. Hadaly build in the last row. Then Psyclone modes made different artists from them. Entheon with Hadaly cap and Citadel that I don't have anymore. I'll omit the Cretan for now as I haven't used them. What I experienced from Hadeon was that this atomizer acted like a compressor on the flavor profile, as in a low pass filter. The base note was subdued as the vape was more mouth-filling and saturated. This change from Hadaly to Hadeon made me think about what has changed. What has changed physically is the chamber reduction. Since NarCA stands for NAR Condensed Atomizer and Citadel also comes with chamber reducer, I'll omit them since they're already aiming for reducing the chamber. What about Hadaly versus Hadeon? You can already see that the chamber size is significantly reduced horizontally. It is about 8.7mm for Hadaly and 6.9mm for Hadeon. What if I measure from the vertical size? The Entheon cap does have a larger chamber for this drip tip specifically from the all drip tips provided. I think the Entheon is designed for the higher wattage vapor, but in South Korea I've seen most of the people were using just the Hadeon cap, which is Hadaly cap plus Entheon. I also prefer Hadeon cap, so if I measure the caps for Hadaly and Hadeon, seemingly the Hadeon cap has a bigger chamber since this one is taller. But if we look at where the coil sits on the deck, we can see where to measure from. Hadaly for here, Hadeon for here. Roughly they have the same height for the air hose relative to the coil. So position of the air hose indicates where the bottom of the coil sits. I'll do all the measurement for you. So it is 6.2 minus 8.5mm, which is 7.7mm for Hadeon vertically. 14.3mm minus 6mm, which is about 8.3mm. That means Hadeon has a smaller chamber vertically and horizontally, like NarEA, which has a very reduced chamber vertically and horizontally. You may argue that you didn't count for juice well. The Entheon deck even has a block which helps for squonking, that reduces the chamber size even more, and these are where the cotton sits. So NarDA and Hadaly have a larger chamber, while NarCA and Hadeon have a smaller chamber. Artists like Citadel, NarEA, and this FLVR are the extreme cases of the condensed chamber, which produce a very saturated vape but lose out a balanced profile, resulting in a very warmer and more humid, less fluffy vape, as if the vapor particles don't have enough room to form into a densely packed cloud. It exists in a bit of more of a liquid state. FLVR even has smaller diameter for the drip tip. So if I vape FLVR with the normal drip tip, if I don't suck harder, I also notice that the juice is all over my mouth, which is not very pleasant for me personally. I mostly like wide bore drip tip with thinner walls. In that respect, this is my favorite 510 drip tip, which is Hadaly drip tip. This is also my favorite drip tip for 810, which is actually the drip tip for the legendary drop RDA. From my previous review, this NarDA 5-vape top cap also has a reduced chamber like NarCA, so I honestly do not like this cap. So I instead use this cap, which gives a more balanced profile and the exhale feels a lot fuller. Especially for the juice that I enjoy, only this cap gives me a pricky feeling in my throat, which other atomizers don't do, which is the reason why I like NarDA. But since it is not another NarDA review, I'll stop. As a side note, now, can you also notice why the MTL atomizer has a significantly smaller chamber? Can you see the proportional relation between the chamber size and the adequate wattage that fills the vape inside the chamber? Alright, let's go on top. Even though I have a background in physics, it is extremely difficult to predict the performance based on the airflow inside the chamber, as it involves the turbulence around the coil with chaotic characteristics. Therefore, from now on, all my reasonings are based on experimental experiences. So when the atomizer produces more fuller mouthfuls of vape, the vapor particles are larger, so that we could experience more in our tongue than the smell. Therefore, the fruity liquid worked better in Hadeon personally, as the vape felt juicier. On contrary, if the vapor particles are more disassembled to smaller scales, I realized that most of the flavorings were perceived from my nose. The example was loose Supersonic from the vapor node. Vaping this atomizer even felt like I was vaping Castella, since the cloud was very thick but not too saturated at all. Therefore, producing a very muted experience when I vaped the sweet, simple profile liquid. It worked quite well with baked and spiced flavorings though. Anyways, then Psyclone mode made Citadel. This one concreted my idea about the proportionality relation between the chamber size and the size of the vapor particles. The Citadel was very sweet and juicy, and it was exceptional for chocolate liquids, but the evenness of the flavors even more decreased from Hadeon to Citadel. What has changed? It was a chamber size with the chamber reducer. I was able to produce on more even flavor from Citadel with higher resistance, with low mass coil and low wattage, but it felt like it wasn't designed for the build considering how much the air is coming in. Also, I have Hadaly for the purpose anyways. Since then, as I mentioned in NarDA review, I believe that there's always an adequate wattage versus the chamber size. So in summary, the reduced chamber atomizers produce fuller mouthful vapes, while the other atomizers produce a more even profile. The former was very good for fruity liquids or for people who like sweetness from the liquids. The latter was suitable for me and also for dessert users who want to experience the detailed profile of the liquid. Therefore, I still use NarDA the most out of NAR modes and Hadaly the most from Psyclone. It is related to how the vaping industry has changed as people started to seek out more reduced chamber atomizers from 2017. But as I said, vaping is a purely subjective experience. The liquids that you have wouldn't be the same as what I have, and the coils you're using would also be different. So there goes my second finding. Secondly, the round wire versus exotic coils, or round wire versus exotic coils. If you use exotic coils, you may realize a more saturated vaping experience in your mouth. This is even superior for people who vape fruity or sweet liquids, because exotic coils trap the liquids inside the texture of the coils, then fry or pop those liquids into your mouth. On the other hand, the round wire is more like spraying a mist, so the experience you may get is more vibrant. Vocabulary that I use may be subtle, since I'm not a native English speaker and I use the words that were translated from the words that I know in Korean. Therefore, I'll need to tell you how I understand the words saturated and vibrant in this context. The saturated vape means fuller mouthfeels with bigger vapor particles, which are mostly sensed from my tongue. The vibrance means a more rounded flavor with smaller particles that I sense from my nose and my mouth. So there is a reason why I chose my reference build as a round wire in my NarDA review, as it helped me experience the flavor in all vibrant senses for my all-day vape. But in the review, I also said there's no single favorite build. It all depends on the liquid. That's true, because for other liquids, I also used fused Clapton, which shines better in that respect. So in summary, the exotic coils, especially with the outer gauge is slower or more coarse, would be suitable for people who want to taste the specific profile that can be perceived mostly from your tongue, like sweetness, sour. The word coarse is subtle here too, because how coarse the coil is also depends on how the air flows inside the chamber, which I may talk about it in future. On the other hand, the round wire gives more rounded flavors that may appeal more to dessert liquid users. I used may in the last sentence because you may prefer differently for the dessert liquids also. For me, the Lanolin cream from Chitin Cloud was the one. This liquid was all-day vape for NarEA, who made NarMode's atomizers, and this is a dessert liquid. I somehow got a better experience from the fused Clapton builds in my NarDA, and I even had a better experience with NarEA, which has a much more reduced chamber. In regards to vaping, I believe the priority is liquids, and the atomizer works to grill those liquids. Therefore, I believe there's no single atomizer that works well for all liquids. So this time, I can once again remind you that there's no right answer to vaping. This leads to the third tendency finding. Third, the temperature control. If someone tells you that there's a way to vape in the perfect way, you may want to try it, but the experience you have may not be optimal. In the past, the temperature control in my sense seemed to guarantee the perfect experience for users, but I don't do temp controls much these days. Why? In order to experience your flavorings in your liquid, a certain temperature has to be reached, depending on flavorings. In my experience, the fruit or the top note from your inhale mostly came from roughly 205 degrees Celsius. I'm afraid the temperature scale is Celsius here, since that is the standard in Korea. From then, we have middle notes. The most common ones are creams such as custard or vanilla. Started to come from 225 degrees Celsius. However, the base notes like bakery or spices, this is graham crust and this is cinnamon Danish roll, they came from 245 degrees Celsius. The temperature for nuttiness was somewhere between the middle note and the base note, even for like pistachio. And the tobacco flavor was a mix of all different temperature scales, including NET liquids, which are naturally extracted tobacco. Now you heard it, and it just sounds like you can completely dial all the flavors you experience, maximized to your personal liking. This almost sounds like a perfect way of vaping theoretically. Yes, indeed in theory. Because as I said numerous times, since vaping is subjective in nature, you may not like it. As an analogy, let's just imagine a situation where a music student brought a classic and say that this is the perfectly composed music from Bach. You hear it, but you may not appreciate it as it does. Also, the reason I do not use much temp control is that I can correctly dial the flavor profile, manipulating the heat flux and heating surface of the non-TC coil. Even though there are still subtle differences in how variable wattage and TC modes perform, meaning that the flavor profile is cleaner in TC, but a bit more toned down, like using an infrared grill, while variable wattage is more like using a charcoal grill. If I show you some of my build notes, I had a chance to use SSV-TI wires, which are highly rated temperature control wires from Sweet Spot Vapors. Thank you, Daniel. And I compare with my reference build, which I showed in my NarDA review. So, testing liquid sugar cookie, tested with my friend, who is a neuroscience, that I might join him in live so that we can understand more deeply about how we perceive flavors. And also I wrote which wire that I used here, temperature and wattage to my desired liking. It was quite clear that it showed quite a balanced profile, like brown sugar, cinnamon cookie, and vanilla. And I also tried with Kanta, which is my go-to wire, something like that. And another build, like 7 reps, because that was the recommended build from SSV TI users, but it didn't produce the desired liking for myself. This is about the heating surface. Also non-TC coil from Swiss Spot Vapor, and there are more results. And my preference for the wire was still Kanto, and I'm going to explain why. In summary, temperature control works really well for people who desire to maximize the flavor profile they would like to achieve. However, it may not work for everyone, because we have to remember that a balanced flavor profile does not guarantee a better experience, since we all like different flavorings even in one liquid. So subjectively, TC work well with liquids with at least 4 different flavorings, and liquids that were usually delicious except for certain flavors. For example, like the top nasty note or the bottom oily note, but those that have been reluctant because of the particular taste. Of course, as long as the TCR value is perfect, the build for temperature control is perfect, and the preheat setting is perfect. I'll talk about this in more detail in the following videos if there's a demand for it, since not many are using this mode anymore. Also, for the people who like to be informed about the TC vape, I'll introduce more in the next video, starting from the brief origin of TC and Dicos versus DNA boards with some theory involved, along with this M-key Dicos squonker. Wrapping up, I believe we should respect all other people's preferences and try to understand, because it'll lead us to learn more from them and create our own better experiences. I'll come back with this squonker review next. For the time being, see you then.